Sada Sri Sriman. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nityalila Pravistram Vishnupad Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Kota Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Ramsay Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasali Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Mathura Dham Ki Jai. Shri Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Oh Prem. All glories to this. All glories to this. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Alright, so thank you all for coming. I know it's a Monday night, so we've all been working in the day, so thank you for making the extra effort. We've been talking about association, and tonight we'll look at another side of that, which means basically with association you either take association or you give association. So we've been talking up to now about the importance of taking the association of the devotees. In many centres all around the world now, we have that opportunity. That was Prabhupada's plan, to set up a network of devotional centres where people can come and they can dedicate their lives in some way or another to Krishna consciousness. So of course he was very highly successful at that. But very often there were problems associated with preaching, in the sense that all the devotees that Prabhupada had to recruit and train up, of course we were all neophytes. So naturally enough, although Srila Prabhupada was a Mahabhagavad, and he assumed the position of a Madhyama Adhikari in order for preaching, we were coming the other way. He was stepping down from the topmost platform to the middle platform. We were stepping up from the lowest platform and trying to come up to that middle platform. So at least with our youthful enthusiasm, that carried us through for a while. But you need more than just, the strength of youth. You need some depth, you need philosophy, you need practice, you need purification. And so Prabhupada knew that it was a risky business sending out new neophyte devotees to preach. But he also knew that by attempting to preach, that was a kind of a fast track, if you like, to spiritual advancement. If you just, here at the temple, you worship the deities, you do your daily functions, there's no challenge to you in that sense. Of course, our own minds and senses are challenges always. But there's no real challenge. You can go peacefully about your business and make steady progress. If you go out and preach, it's like when soldiers go out to war. They're kind of risking their necks in order to achieve their objective. So they get special on it. Just like when I was flying on the airplane in America, every airline, they have a system. They call the first passengers onto the plane first class, platinum class, gold class, and then a uniform military. So So any soldier that's there, they get some little special treatment when they come through the security when they board the aircraft. And as Prabhupada made the point that if somebody dies in the fight, then the country, they look after the relatives. They take care of the family, they provide some pension, some place to stay like that. So they get a little special treatment. So when we're preaching, we're putting ourselves in the firing line. Yeah, we're going out and we're meeting sometimes with hostility. We're also meeting with, constant bombardment provided by the three modes of material nature, particularly the mode of ignorance and passion. So much of our so-called modern civilization, it's not only just a manifestation of ignorance, but as Prabhupada made the point that the personality of Kali expands the influence of Maya. So in this age, it's particularly difficult. It's bad enough that we're in Maya, material consciousness, but the personality of Kali, his business is to expand the influence of the mode of ignorance in particular. So we have to be strong if we want to preach, because that's one way to get strength. If you're not well equipped, but you go out and do the duty anyway, then you have to learn fairly rapidly what's required in order to be able to keep yourself fit for doing the task at hand. So in the same way, with devotional service, if we take a little risk, if we do a little austerity, whilst at the same time carefully managing our own spiritual lives, but if we go out and we try to think about how to introduce the conditioned souls back to their natural position of Krishna consciousness, then that gets some special favor from Krishna, from Lord Chaitanya. They take special note. So on June 10th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Los Angeles. We'd arrived there on the 1st of June after a month in Hawaii, and this was coming up to the last day. The following morning was the last class. So Prabhupada gave a nice example in his class about association, but in this case, being strong enough so that we don't get affected by others' association. We're out there to give our association, but we don't want to take the association of gross materialists. So Prabhupada told us, he said, so many swamis and yogis have come in this country, America. So they advertised in India that they went out of India for preaching Vedanta. But being influenced, what Vedanta have they learned? When they returned to India, they'd learned how to entice women and how to eat meat. That is a specific reference, although Prabhupada didn't name the particular mission that refers to, but it was referring to a particular sannyasi who used to advertise he was the first one to preach in America, so-called sannyasi, and when they came back they set up a mission, which Prabhupada sometimes nicknamed the Murgi mission. You know what Murgi is? Chicken. The chicken mission. Because actually, although they dress as sannyasis, they eat meat, they drink, they do everything ordinary people do, but they make up some philosophy to try to support it, so that's very deadly. It's like the jewel on the hood of a cobra. It looks very attractive, but you go near, you get bitten with the poison of impersonalism. So Prabhupada is saying, what have they learned? They went to America supposedly to teach Vedanta, but instead he simply learned how to eat meat and entice women. So this is their Vedanta. Because Karanam Gunasam Yosya, if you're not strong enough, then association will induce or influence you. If you are not a Vaishnava, and if you go into a brothel or a liquor house, then you are sure to be influenced by the drunkards and the prostitute hunters. But if you're strong enough, then you will give your effective association, and they will become Vaishnavas. That is the difference. As an example of the effects of association, Prabhupada told us about Typhoid Mary. Some of you have heard about Typhoid Mary. So many people were suffering, but she was not suffering. So by analysis of blood, it was found that this girl, her blood was full of the typhoid germs, but she was so strong that she could resist it. She was not suffering. But wherever she used to go, everyone was infected with typhoid. So that is the explanation. Karanam Gunasangosya. If you are strong enough, then the lower qualities will not affect you. And if you are not strong, if you are weak yourself, then where you are going to convert, they will induce their infectious quality and you will become victimized. Prabhupada said that lust and greed are the symptoms of the two lower modes of nature. And if one is not greedy and lusty, if he is satisfied in every circumstance and is Krishna conscious, or is trying to become Krishna conscious, then it is sattva-guna. He is turned, just like our students. A little association with this Krishna consciousness movement, they immediately come to sattva-guna, at least officially. Although Rajagun, Tamagun was there, but it overlaps. So how does it overlap? What is this process? Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna, Punya Shravana Kirtana, Bridjantasto Abhadrani, Vidanoti Surit Satam. Krishna is within everyone. And if we simply hear the words and instructions of Krishna, the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, which is full of Krishna's pastimes and Krishna's instruction, if we hear this, especially these two books, then you become pious. There is no need of making separate attempt, but just by hearing the message of God, gradually you become a devotee. This is the process, how to transcend the material qualities, and that is explained. So, in my song, now this is the song that Prabhupada wrote when he was just at the docks, when he first arrived in America. So I was thinking on board the ship that Rajas Tamogune Era Savai Archana Vasudeva Kataruchi Nahi Se Prasana. Nobody will be interested. At the present moment, everybody is covered by the Raja and Tama, the base qualities of ignorance and passion, and so they have no interest in Krishna consciousness. So therefore I wrote, Tabi Jali, Taba Kripa, Ahaya Haituki, Sakali Sambhava Hoi Tumi Seko Tuki. That God is all powerful, Krishna is all powerful, and He can do everything impossible, possible. So whatever is being done in our Krishna consciousness movement, do not think that it is my influence. This is Prabhupada talking. Do not think that it is my influence. It is Krishna's. Krishna can do everything. He can change Sattva-gun into Rajagun, Rajagun into Tamagun, Tamagun into Rajagun, and Rajagun into Sattva-gun. This is as he likes. Just like an expert electrician, he can turn the heater into a cooler and a cooler into a heater. The electrical energy is just the same. Similarly, Parasya Shakti Vividaya Shruyate. Krishna has his energy. So if he likes, he can do anything. My point is that this Krishna consciousness movement has come to your country by the will of Krishna. So here is the favorable situation. Because the will of Krishna is there, that now the Westerners, especially the Americans, they should become Krishna conscious. That is His will. So you take the opportunity and cooperate with Krishna, and you'll be successful. Thank you very much. So Prabhupada's very humble there, not taking the credit for the work that he'd done. As he said, it was Krishna's will, and therefore it must happen. Nevertheless, we were discussing this the other day, a devotee of Krishna's will is executed through the persona of his devotees. It's not impersonal, and it's not just that he waves some kind of magic wand and then everything is transformed. He can do that. But the whole point about devotional service is that it is voluntary. The whole point about bhakti is that it's voluntary. The living beings are part and parcels of Krishna. They're not different from Him, but they have minute independence. And without that minute independence to choose whether to love Krishna or not, there'll be no question of actual love or bhakti. Bhakti is a choice. We choose to love Krishna. Even though he's so wonderful, he's everything rests in him, he's pervading everything. Still, we have to make the choice. And that choice, voluntary, means love. If there's no choice, then it means mechanical. Robots. Then where is the love? So Krishna can do anything that he likes, but when he makes the offer to the conditioned souls to come back to Godhead, then he does that through his devotees. That's the parampara system. So Prabhupada is a humble devotee. He's recognizing that everything is done by Krishna. But we shouldn't then impersonalize that and say, well, okay, here Prabhupada admits that it was Krishna's will that the Krishna consciousness movement would spread. So it's nice that he, was the one that brought it, but it was Krishna's will anyway, and therefore Krishna gets the credit. Some people minimize like that. Oh, anybody could have done that. Did I tell the story about Columbus and friends? Alright, anyway, to illustrate that, we were in Hyderabad in 1976 in December. We were staying on the newly acquired farm there, about 560 acres. And they were building a small bungalow for Srila Prabhupada, but it wasn't quite ready when he arrived, so they put us in this strip of rooms, like a brick cottage with 4 rooms in a line, with a tin roof. Very, very simple. They were just farm outhouses, really. And the roof sloped towards the back of the room, and it came down to about 6 feet level. So it's just, when you were at the back of the room, it was just above your head, and it was sloping down. So there was an almirah covered there. And somebody gave Prabhupada a nice picture, some deity or Krishna like that. So Prabhupada gave it to me, and he said, now just put it on top of the almirah. So I went over, and I was trying to get this picture in. And the roof was sloping down, so there was only a little gap. And somehow or another, I just couldn't get it in. I couldn't get it to stand up. So Prabhupada came over, he took the picture off me, and he just went, and that was it. It was in. It was standing up, and he did it so quick and easy. Everybody laughed. And then Prabhupada said, everything requires a little intelligence. And then he said, you know about Columbus and friends? So we said, no. So he said, well, one time Christopher Columbus, he was with his friends, and they were all saying, oh, what you did in discovering America, anybody could have done that. Nothing special required. America is there, the ships are there, you sail across the ocean, you run into America. What's the big deal? So Columbus was arguing, no, it actually takes some intelligence. So they wouldn't have it. So then he said, I'll prove it to you. So he took out an egg, chicken egg. So he said, now make this egg stand on its end on the table. So each one of them, one by one, they tried to make the egg stand on end, but nobody could do it. It kept rolling over and falling over. So then Columbus took the egg and he said, now I'll show you. So he took the egg and he went bang. And he flattened the end of the shell and then stood it up. So then they said, well, anybody could have done that. And he said, no, the table was there, the egg was there. You couldn't make it stand up, but I did. So, this is our reply to those that minimize what Srila Prabhupada did in going to America, same as Columbus, and giving people Krishna consciousness and starting, fulfilling this prediction of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srila Prabhupada could do it by the strength of his purity, so that anybody that associated with him were immediately affected by him. And within a very short time, you see that so many fortunate souls who came in contact with him, they were influenced to give up their old way of life. They immediately came up to this platform of Sattva-gun, and then up to the transcendental Sudasattva platform. So that was by the strength of Prabhupada's association. So although Prabhupada's not taking the credit, and he's saying, this Krishna consciousness movement has come to your country by the will of Krishna, and he says, that that's not from me, that's because Krishna has decided it. But we should understand that Prabhupada was so surrendered to Krishna that Krishna was acting through him, and that will of Krishna, yes, it's Krishna's will that the movement would spread all over the world, but still a devotee has to surrender to that will in order for it to be enacted. That instruction to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world was not given just to Srila Prabhupada. Because we see that even in the 1930s, when Prabhupada had just become initiated in early 1933. Those three devotees were sent to London with the hope that they would establish some Krishna conscious centers in the West. But they couldn't do it. It didn't work, and after 2 or 3 years they were brought back, and back to Saraswati, who had been sending them 700 rupees a month to support them in the West. And this is in the 1930s. Practically speaking, an ordinary man could live on 1 or 2 rupees a month. So 700 rupees a month was a huge amount of money, but nothing came of it. But when Prabhupada went, he had the same instruction. When he first met his spiritual master in 1922, when he last got his contact with his spiritual master in December of 1936, he was told the same thing. Preach in English, do good for others, and that will be good for you also. So Prabhupada took that very seriously. He took it to heart. He surrendered to the instruction and desire of his spiritual master. And because of that complete surrender, then when he came to the West, he was very effective. He had absolute faith in the power of the holy names, so that these modes of ignorance and passion would, immediately be removed, and the person that listens to the Harinam, or sings the Harinam, takes prasadam, engages in some kind of activity in Krishna consciousness, they're immediately freed from those low modes of material nature. And that's the sum and substance of the song that Prabhupada wrote when he was on the boat, before it even stepped off the boat practically. He wrote this song that everybody's covered by the modes of ignorance and passion. So how will they be saved? But you can do it. You can do it. You have the power. You're the Supreme Lord. You can transform these modes of material nature and bring these people up to the right platform. And then he also submits himself. So if you brought me here to dance, then make me dance, make me dance, make me dance. That was Prabhupada's move. So when he came to the West, he was coming to give his association, not to, become, as we say, bodhisattva, or even a big Westerner, as they used to say in India. No, he was transforming others. That was Prabhupada's point. So, Typhoid Mary, good example. She was so strong that she was not affected by the typhoid germ, but everybody that came in contact with her, they caught typhoid. Yeah, and then they started to realize wherever this girl goes, she's causing so many problems, everybody's becoming poisoned. So in the same way, wherever a devotee goes, that will be the effect. For the materialist, it will be a poisonous effect. All of their material life will be finished if you get association with a pure devotee. So, September the 20th, 1976, then, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, and he was talking on the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, this particular day was Ekadasi. Despite feeling ill, Prabhupada could not resist giving class this morning. It is almost impossible for him to refrain from preaching about the glories of Lord Krishna. He spoke strongly for about 25 minutes, stressing the need for us to hear about God from an authority or a Mahajan like Arjuna. People like to speculate, but the descriptions of God are given by the Mahajans and are very clear, Prabhupada said. This is our Krishna consciousness movement. That why are you searching? You say, can you show me God? Why don't you see? Here is God. Why? Just like an owl, you have closed your eyes so that you cannot see the sun. The sun is there. See it. Open your eyes and see it. But the whole world is going on there. Oh, there is no God. Or God is dead. Or can you show me God? Or I am God by meditation. This way, that way. This is going on. The whole world at the present moment is in a great disastrous condition, godless civilization. They won't accept the real God, and they'll create some artificial God and become God themselves, or everybody is God, like that. So here we have Arjuna. He is a Mahajan. He is Krishna's friend. He's always with Krishna, and Krishna recognizes him. Not that because one is always with Krishna, therefore he knows Krishna. That's an interesting statement. Not that because one is always with Krishna, that therefore he knows him. How is that? No, that is not possible, just like I've given the example many times, that I am sitting here, and a bug is also sitting here, on the same seat. That does not mean that we are very confidential. No, the bug is a different business, and my business is different. And the bug's business is biting. So that kind of association will not help. Association means to develop love for the person. That is association. It's interesting. Association means to develop love for the person. That is association. That's the proper way through bhakti. So we have to become an associate of Krishna, as Arjuna became. Always with Krishna. Eating with Krishna, sitting with Krishna, talking with Krishna, joking with Krishna, fighting with Krishna. Everything Krishna. Krishna, does he remain with anyone unless he is very dear? So we have to establish some relationship with Krishna. As a servant, as a friend, as a son, as a father or mother, or like the gopis, Madhurya Ras, friendship, conjugal love. So Krishna is ready to associate with you in any way that you like. So, nice expression. Prabhupada had a wonderful way of putting up the meanings of his ideas in the English language. So, his point there is that if you become an associate, that means that you're developing an affection. Nobody hangs around with people that they don't like. Where birds of a feather flock together. Those who have the same mentality, they get enthusiasm and strength by associating with others who have the same common goals. So Prabhupada created a situation all around the world where those that are interested in associating with Krishna, as Arjuna did, then they can come and very easily attain that association. All of our centers, they're all centered around practically at least the worship of the deities. We have sadhana, where we worship together, do everything together. There's strength in numbers. And if we keep ourselves aloof, if we don't like to associate, that's a very precarious condition. Because at any moment the mind is very flickering, and it can be dragged away or attracted to something non-devotional. So if we want to make advancement favorably, then we have to always stick together and help each other, take each other's association. Now, another example of association, but a little different angle on this. This is a slideshow that was presented to Srila Prabhupada at the beginning of July 1976. We saw on the slideshow last night, I showed you Sadhaputta Prabhu and the members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute when they had their first set of meetings with Prabhupada in Washington. So during those meetings, one evening, they showed Prabhupada a slideshow. And with all the explanations and everything, it went on for 3 hours. So it was all on scientific topics. It was the first attempts by our scientists, devotees, to go out and preach in the colleges and universities in America. So they put together a slideshow showing, different ways by which we could see that evolutionary theory was not possible, or it didn't explain everything. There's loopholes in it and difficulties in their theories. So they showed Bhakti-Swarup Damodar, he showed Prabhupada the first half of the show, and then before handing over the commentary to Sadhaputta, who was a mathematician, he showed another slide about the famous biologist Louis Pasteur. Has everybody heard of Louis Pasteur? Nobody knows who Louis Pasteur is? You're kidding. Louis Pasteur was the one who invented penicillin. Yeah, he figured out how penicillin works for inoculating people against disease. At least in Europe, it's very famous. So a picture of a glass bottle with a long spout appeared on the screen. Swarup Damodar said he believes strongly in God. He got a prize for doing his experimentation from a French academy. So the flask, glass flask, contains a sugar solution and with some yeast to ferment it at the beginning. But now the experiment was to completely kill any germs inside the flask by heating, by sterilization, and then let it cool down automatically, and then keep it for some time, say for 2 or 3 days, and then see whether there is any life developed within that broth. So they had this flask with a long spout, they put some mixture of stuff in it, and boiled it up and made it sterile, and then they kept it locked up, but they let it cool down naturally, and the idea was to see whether any symptoms of life would appear within the flask without any outside influence. So Pasteur found that there was no microorganisms fermenting in the solution inside the flask. But after some time he cut the neck of the flask, and as soon as its neck was cut, then the microorganisms from the surrounding atmosphere entered into the flask, and then the solution became fermented. So that was actually the proof that without the presence of microorganisms from outside, from the atmosphere, then life cannot grow into matter. So this slide also included a quote by Louis Pasteur. He said, "Posterity will one day laugh at the foolishness of the modern materialistic philosophers." And he's a scientist himself. "The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the works of the Creator." So that's a choice. You can observe the workings of material nature and think that it's working so perfectly, there's no God involved, it's just all a big mechanism. And that's the propaganda that we get. But why would you assume that? If you see that everything is working so perfectly, so minutely, and so on such a big scale, universally, and on a tiny scale, atomically, on molecular structures, if you see that they're working so perfectly, then why do you assume that that came about by chance? Why not see that as a product of thought, a product of consciousness, a product of intent? How you can get such what they call nowadays as intelligent design. Yeah. Everything works so perfectly. What's the chance of it becoming, coming into being just, without any outside influence? That was the point that he was making here. That in that flask, without outside influence, no life is coming in. Simply, this universe is in a simple position. It's an enclosed space. How the life comes about, unless it comes from outside. Anyway, a simple example, but this was one of the leading philosophers or scientists of his time, Louis Pasteur. So Prabhupada liked the example. Yes, he said that is Vedic theory. That is explained in the Bhagavatam. He described how the combination of male and female secretions how by the combination of male and female secretions, a situation is created by which life, the soul, can then enter and take shelter. It is not the man's and woman's sex life that makes life. Life comes from outside when there is a suitable condition to enter in. Krishna directs the soul to a particular womb to take birth. So Prabhupada added some pertinence to Swarup Damodar's statement about the adverse social effects that arise from the molecules to life theory. He said that if by contraception or abortion the soul is prevented from entering or is kicked out of the womb, that is a criminal act. But they do not know the laws of nature, Prabhupada told us, and how it is working. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani samvasa. The laws of nature are working very silently and subtly. Ahankara vimudatma kataram iti manyate. The rascal is so fooled that he thinks I can do anything and everything, whatever I like. Similarly, the killing of animal. Well, life is eternal, one can argue, then what is the wrong there? Even if I kill, the soul is still alive. No, this soul was to live in a particular type of body under the laws of nature, and you have checked him, and he has now to take again a similar body to fulfill the duration. Therefore, you have done criminality. I have got a lease for living in this room for a certain period. If prior to the expiry of the lease, if the landlord drives me away, that is illegal and it will be punished. So that's another argument that people sometimes use, that if the soul is eternal, what's the big deal if you kill the body? The soul doesn't die, it just moves on to another situation. And Krishna, in fact, uses that argument to Arjuna when he first starts explaining, what we call the Bhagavad Gita. That you're, in illusion, you're thinking that you're going out and you're killing so many other people, your friends and relatives, but they're not their bodies. And you're not actually killing anything. One who is in knowledge knows that he cannot be killed and he does not kill. So the atheist can use that and turn the argument around and say, well, if everybody's a spirit soul and never dies, what's the big deal? If we kill and eat their body, we're not eating the soul. But here Prabhupada gives the answer. That everybody's got an allotment, a particular body that they have to go into for a particular time. Now if some person comes along and checks my ability to remain in that situation, that soul then has to take another birth in the same kind of form in order to fulfill the duration, punishment or karma that it was due. So there's an interference in that soul's rights, and therefore there's some punishment. Prabhupada had the verse beginning Karmana Davanai Trainer from the 3rd canto read out. The personality of Godhead said, under the supervision of the Supreme Lord, and according to the results of his work, the living entity, the soul, is made to enter into the womb of a woman through the particle of male semen to assume a particular type of body. Prabhupada then described how the soul qualifies itself for a particular type of body by its association with the modes of nature. So this is the point that we're coming to. This is another kind of association. We give and take association between ourselves, but we also are associating with the atmosphere that we're living in. We're influenced by that. This is Kali Yuga. So, if one comes to a human form, then it has by chance, by association with goodness, to become a Brahmana and then a Vaishnava. So Prabhupada said, when you become a Vaishnava, Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pasyanti, then you are hankering after Vishnu, then your life is a success. And to keep them dull-brained, that is the greatest disservice. They've got the capacity to become a Brahmana, and they're keeping him just like a dull-brained mountain and tree. So that we want to stop. It is suicidal to the human society. So that was Prabhupada's point, that if a person comes to the human form of life, other forms of life are in the modes of ignorance. When you come to the human form of life, you have a chance to come up to Sudasattva, or at least Sattva, the mode of goodness. And in the mode of goodness, then there's a chance for enlightenment, realization, self-discovery, understanding the Supreme Lord, and then you have a chance to get out of this material world and solve all your problems. But the material scientists, by this propaganda that there's no God, life comes about by chance, it has no real purpose, there's no goal. So this propaganda, Prabhupada says here, is to keep people dull-brained, to prevent them actually from taking advantage of this valuable human form. So keeping dull-brained like a mountain and tree. And therefore he said this is the greatest disservice to human society. And we want to stop that. So, on the same thing then, preachers must be strong and give their association. There's another example of that. When we were in Toronto, this was in June of 1976. From LA we'd gone to Detroit, then we went up for 6 days to Toronto. We just purchased a new property there, the same one that we have now. And Prabhupada was invited to come and see it. So on the morning walks, some of the members of the library party were with us. Harisauri Maharaj was in charge of that at that time. The library party was particularly effective in selling standing orders of Prabhupada's books in all the universities and libraries, first in North America and then later on in Europe and then India and Australia. So they would visit, they knew all the professors quite well. One professor, Joseph O'Connell, was going to come and see Srila Prabhupada this particular afternoon. Now O'Connell was actually quite favourable. He met Prabhupada one time before in London, and when he came this particular time he was very friendly. We met him I met him a few years after this, and in fact when we got our library going in Calcutta about 2-3 years ago, he came and visited the library. By that time he was retired. When he met Prabhupada in 76 he was about 38 or something. So when he came to see us, he was in his 70s. But he was going to help us to develop the library. At least he said he would come and give us some advice and things. Unfortunately, just after he left us, then he had a brain hemorrhage and he died. But anyway, this is in 76. And Satsrup was giving a little background on Professor O'Connell, who was to visit him in the afternoon. So he said that the professor had written a review of Dr. Stilson Judah's book, Hare Krishna and the Counterculture. So this was one of the first studies on the American Vaishnavas, or the members of ISKCON, as part of the counterculture. In the 60s in America, they had this thing called the counterculture, where a lot of young people were just walking away from their homes. They went off to San Francisco and other places, and they were looking for something different. They were looking for a different kind of culture than the one that they were brought up in. And that was such a phenomenon that it became known as the counterculture. And it was within that counterculture that ISKCON made its appearance. So some people thought that ISKCON, or the Hare Krishna movement, was part of this counterculture. Drugs, free sex, do whatever you like, any way you like, living like, we say hippies, but living like bums in the parks. But they thought that the Hare Krishna movement, because some of our early recruits came from that hippie class, not all, but some, then people thought that the Krishna consciousness movement was part of this counterculture. But this Stilson Judah, he was a professor in Berkeley, he knew there was something else going on, and so he interviewed a lot of devotees. He wrote this book, Hare Krishna and the Counterculture, and he explained that actually we're completely different from the hippie movement, and this is a serious spiritual movement, and that it's doing very good work in converting the hippies into sane people. So that book came out, a copy was sent to Srila Prabhupada. He liked it so much that he had his secretary carry it around with him wherever we went. And frequently when he was talking, especially to other professors, he would bring out Stilson Judah's book. Stilson Judah was a very well-respected person in American academics. So this Joseph O'Connell, he had written a review on Stilson Judah's book. The review was favourable, Satsrup said, but Professor O'Connell had one objection. He said it was a very sympathetic book, Dr. Judah's, and a little bit too sympathetic on one point. He made this statement that he thinks that our movement, the way that we deny the flesh, he called it denying the flesh, it tends to make us a little cold in our relationships with each other, and that people in the Hare Krishna movement are denying the natural affection that is somehow connected with the flesh. So that was, he appreciated certain aspects of the philosophy, but he just felt that Prabhupada's insistence on celibacy, or at least only sex within marriage, that was too stringent, and it was leading to colder relationships, or lack of relationship in the movement. So Prabhupada replied that according to Lord Chaitanya, a Vaishnava should not associate with those who are too much attached to women. Since we are following that policy, we cannot be sympathetic to such a society. He said, those who are infected, they should be separated. You cannot make any compromise. So Satsvarupa explained that the professor, so Prabhupada was taking it that, ISKCON was kind of insular and was out of mainstream society. And so Prabhupada thought that the professor was complaining that we've isolated ourselves and we don't have normal integration, with the rest of the population. But then Satsvarupa explained that the professor was referring within our own society, ISKCON society. His point was that even amongst ourselves, or even amongst the devotees, there's not enough expression of love. I think what it comes down to is that he objects that we are against illicit sex. So Prabhupada and the devotees laughed. Oh, that means he is accustomed. And Jagadish added, well, these professors, they sit around and discuss topics of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and drink wine. That's, scholars. They go and they study the Gaudiya Vaishnava movement, they go straight to the works of the six Goswamis. And because they have some skill at translating Sanskrit or other Indian languages into English, then they think that they're, discovering the true meanings. But the fact is that their habits remain the same. They have all the bad habits. And therefore there's no question of them properly understanding anything to do with Rupa Goswami and the Goswamis. So Satsvarupa agreed. He said their discussion is very blasphemous. This Dr. Dimmock, he has made much investigation of the six Goswamis, and he has read all the manuscripts, and he's always going to India and studying Rupa Goswami and Lord Chaitanya, but everything is extremely blasphemous that he writes. So, Professor Dimmock, if you ever got the first Macmillan edition, Penguin edition of Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, there was a foreword or like an introduction by this Professor Dimmock. He was considered to be the foremost authority on Gaudiya Vaishnavism during the late 60s and mid-70s. So, a couple of funny stories about him. The devotees went to see him. The devotees went to see him to get a foreword, something favourable that they could put in Prabhupada's newly published, about to be published edition of the Bhagavad Gita. But actually, he didn't fully agree with Prabhupada's presentation of the Gita, and so he wasn't willing to give, something very favourable. He appreciated it from some points of view, but it was not very favourable. So what the devotees did was they knew this man was a drunkard. He was a big professor, but he was a drunkard. And so they rewrote the review, and then they waited until he was drunk. And they got him to sign it. So he signed it, and then it was published. It was very favourable. And then when it was published, Dimmock read it when he was sober, and he was shocked. And so he ended up insisting that it be removed again. So in the next edition, it wasn't there. But anyway, this is the kind of man that he was. And the devotees, had this dealing with him. So again, that was in the late 60s when Brahmananda was getting the Gita published. Then again in the mid 70s, Prabhupada, He started work on the Chaitanya Charitamrita. In a year and it took him 1.5 years to complete the entire 17-volume series, complete with word for word, transliterations, purports, paintings showing all the different things, photographs showing all the different places, elaborate edition. So in 75, the devotees, after the full publication of CC, they were going around on the library party, and they would go to different libraries and universities and induce the libraries there to put in an order, like a standing order. So they got all the books that were currently published, and then there was a standing order that all the books that are yet to come would automatically be accepted by them. So the way that they got these libraries to order, the librarians would not order unless there was a demand from the professors or from the students. So our men were going, they'd go to the library and there was what was called a requisition form. You had to fill in all the details. If somebody wanted a particular book and it wasn't in the library, they could fill in this form, give all the details and sign it, and then that would be processed and then the librarian would purchase the book. So our men, they were going to all the different professors and they had these requisition forms and we filled them out already with all the book titles and informations. All it needed was a signature. So then they would go and they would see some professor, show him the books, and they'd be from like the philosophical department, Southeast Asian studies department, whatever. And then when they got 4 or 5 professors, when they got the professor friendly, they would maybe give a sample of the book, and when they would agree, yes, we should have this book, then they would pull out the already filled in form and ask them, can you just sign here? And then they would take the signed form and give it to the librarian, and that's how we were, selling so many standing orders. So apparently the devotees went to see Dimmock. And now the thing about Dimmock was that he had been working on his own translation of the Chaitanya Charitamrita for many, many years. He learned Bengali and some Sanskrit. And so he was working, and this was going to be his magnus opus, like the work of his lifetime. This was going to be his contribution to human society, and the thing, that would earn him eternal name and fame. So he'd been working very painstakingly for many years on his Chaitanya Charitamrita translation. And then the devotees walk in and they say, well, would you put in an order to the library? Bang, for 17 volumes, the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita by Bhaktivedanta Swami. They said when he saw that Prabhupada had published the whole work, with commentaries and everything else, he practically had a heart attack. So what he couldn't do in his whole lifetime, Prabhupada did in 18 months, along with, doing the Bhagavatam, along with traveling like, crazy all over the world, creating a worldwide society and thousands of disciples. Prabhupada did what this fellow couldn't do in his whole lifetime. I did hear that Dimmock did finally get it translated, but he died before it could be published, and they couldn't find a publisher. And then eventually, I think 1 or 2 of his followers, students, they decided that to honour him by getting it published. So it came into print one time, and I believe it's out of print since then. Anyway, so that's a little bit of background about Dr. Dimmock, who was supposed to be the leading authority on Chaitanya Vaishnavism. He would go to India, he would go to Vrindavan, he would study the works of the 6 Goswamis, but everything that he wrote was completely blasphemous because it was in mundane consciousness. So it's not just a question of scholarship, it's a question of realization and purity. And therefore Prabhupada, was expressing the need for our men to remain pure, because when you're coming in contact with these kinds of people, although they seem to be very learned and knowledgeable, but actually the conclusions are completely off, and they can't help us to become devotees. So Prabhupada, so Satsvarup went on. So in both ways, In their habits and whatever they write, they're blasphemous. The library party men, when they become friendly to these professors, but they only go there to use them more or less so that they'll accept our books despite themselves. Prabhupada expressed his approval. He said, yes, that we must do. Our policy is that when we go to a man of bad character, we don't go to associate with him, but we go to give our association. Therefore we must be strong and very pure, so that by your association they will be benefited. For the preachers, Ishware Tadadine Shu, Balishe Shu, Dvisatsu. The four behaviors are there. Ishwara, Tadadine Shu, devotees, Balishe Shu, innocent, and Dvisatsu, those who are envious. So those who are preachers, then pray. They love God, they make friendship with the devotees, and those who are innocent, they try to deliver. And those who are envious, then they reject. So that's a nice example of the professors. They appear to be very learned and favourable in so many ways, but actually their hearts are not changed. And they see everything through the screen of the modes of material nature, so it all becomes distorted. So one has to be very careful then, especially in preaching work. When we go out, we have to associate with so many mundane persons. And also, even if we're not preaching, but if we're just having to work every day in the factory or in business, and you're working with ordinary people, sometimes, you know, we meet people, we think, oh, they're very nice. Yeah, they're very kind or very good, you know, well-wisher, but they're not devotees. But not every non-devotee, you know, is a demon. I mean, there's lots of nice people out there, but they're just innocent. So that may be so, but because they don't understand that they're not this body, then when you associate with them, then they relate to you as if they are the body, and they relate to you as if you are your body. So the whole language and the tone and the intent of the conversation is all on the bodily platform. And if we get too close in friendship to non-devotees, we start to think or become influenced by this idea that we are the body. Because automatically you have to interact with them on the bodily platform. Now if you were to bring them to the temple, you could see whether they would be willing to interact with you on the transcendental platform. By coming into the temple, bowing before the deities, chanting Hare Krishna, taking prasadam, discussing the philosophy of Christian consciousness as we're doing now. That would be nice if they're open to that, but most people aren't. So when a person becomes a devotee, you really find out who your real friends are. Many of you have had the same experience. You know, even within a family, sometimes a person becomes a devotee, the rest of the family, you know, they become completely alarmed and objecting and sometimes aggressive and angry. They don't want you to become a devotee. So, you know, we get obliged to think in a certain way, to act in a certain way by the association that we have. And we have to be very careful that that doesn't drag us down back into that material pool. If a person's really a friend and somebody becomes a devotee, then they'll appreciate, oh, my friend's found some happiness and some meaning here, that's very nice, let me support him. So, people that we meet, ordinary people that are not informed about Krishna consciousness, if they're a little favourable or friendly, that's nice, that's an opportunity to give them something more valuable than anything else in their lives. But if they are not interested or they reject any idea of spirituality, then don't associate with them anymore. That won't be beneficial at all, either for them or for us. Okay, so now we've talked a bit about the importance of association, giving and taking association. There's a couple of examples here of where Prabhupada advises better to not have association. Although it's stressed in all our books, the only way to advance is by associating with devotees. There's a couple of examples that I can think of where Prabhupada told a devotee that it's not important to have the association with devotees. One of them was on February the 5th, 1976, Prabhupada was in Mayapur. Harikesh Prabhu had been on the party for some months. He was Prabhupada's cook, and he was also transcribing Prabhupada's Bhagavatam dictations from the evenings. So on February the 5th, then he had approached Prabhupada previously about taking sannyas, and then Prabhupada agreed. So he gave him sannyas on February the 5th, along with another devotee from South America. So Prabhupada gave a short talk explaining that sannyas is simply a facility to preach and spread Krishna consciousness. He awarded the two men their new cloth and tridandas, the traditional monks' staffs. And he told Harikesh, simply add Swami to your name. And he renamed Virahadas as Viraha Prakash Swami. Then he returned to his room while the devotees conducted the fire ceremony. As soon as Prabhupada settled into his room, he asked Sri Dayananda Maharaj how the two new sannyasis were to be engaged. He was informed that Viraha Prakash Swami plans to stay in Mayapur for a few weeks to get Prabhupada's personal association before returning to South America. But Prabhupada said that was not good. He should go immediately out and preach. So he had the idea that Prabhupada never really went to South America, because he went to Venezuela, and I think he went to Mexico, which is not really South America, but Central America. And that was all. So there were many devotees at that time that were joining that had never seen Srila Prabhupada. And so this particular devotee, Viraha, he had come all the way to Mayapur, one, to take sannyas. He was being recommended by Hridayananda Maharaj, and two, he wanted to get a few weeks staying in the same vicinity as Prabhupada, hearing him talk every day, getting the chance for darshans, etc. And then his idea was that he would stay until Gaur Purnima, and then after that return to South America. But Prabhupada didn't like that idea. He said, no, he's taken sannyas now, he must go out and preach immediately. It's the principle. Sannyas is meant for preaching, so you should start off as you intend to continue. So now you've taken sannyas, immediately go out and preach. That was his idea. So Hridayananda Maharaj explained that Viraha Prakash only speaks in Spanish, so it would be difficult for him to preach in India. In other words, then if he had to go out and preach, then the only place he could do that would be to go back to a Spanish-speaking country, which would mean leaving India and losing Prabhupada's association. If he went just out preaching in, Calcutta or something, who would understand it? But Prabhupada promptly called for the two new sannyasis. So he called Harikesh as well, and he told them, you leave immediately for somewhere, anywhere, and preach. When there is a fire, even if you don't know the language, somehow you have to communicate and the message will get through. Even if you cannot speak the language properly, it doesn't matter. Preaching must be done. He said that the best use of intelligence was to accept sannyas and go and preach. It is also the best way to associate with the Guru, he said. Personal association is not so important, but associating with the teachings of the Guru is essential. So Prabhupada said that he had not seen his Guru Maharaj for more than 10 or 15 days in 14 years. Thus his words were a personal encouragement and comfort to Harikesh also, because he is now leaving Prabhupada's personal service. So the two of them, slightly different, coming from different circumstances, but both got the same instruction to go out and preach immediately. And of course for Harikesh to hear that it's more important to serve the teachings than the personal form of the Guru was important, because he just spent many months on Prabhupada's party, cooking and doing so many services for him, and now he was going to lose that association. So Prabhupada told him, just go out and preach, that's the main thing. And this idea of not speaking the language At the time when Prabhupada said, it doesn't matter if there's a fire, you get the message out somehow or another, even if you can't speak the language. I thought he was talking mainly to Viraha Prakash, Spanish speaking in India, now he has to go back to his own country. I didn't really kind of associate that with Harikesh's situation, because he could have stayed in India and preached there with no problem in the English language. Most educated people in India do speak English, but actually before he took sannyas, he discussed with Srila Prabhupada what he would do, and it was decided that he would go to America and he would join up with the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan parties. At that time, under Tamal Krishna and Vishnu Jan Swamis, there was this force of about 130 brahmacharis and 6 or 7 sannyasis that were preaching all over America. They were selling hundreds of thousands of literatures every month. They were putting $50,000 in every month to the BBT. So it was decided that Harikesh would go and join the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party and be trained up, and then he could take charge of one of the buses and do preaching in America. So, again, when Prabhupada had this analogy of the fire and not being able to speak the language, or somehow or another the message must get through, I thought he was just talking about Viraha Prakash. But actually it turned out to be quite different, because when Harikesh left India the next day, that was it, when it was decided you were off the party, there was no break, take a few days to adjust. The next day you were gone, to your new assignment. So Harikesh left the next day. He had to drop off in England for a couple of days before he got his ticket through to America. And when he arrived in London, he met with one of the devotees from Germany, Alanath, and he had just received an invitation to go and visit Poland. Poland was, part of the Soviet Union at that time, and it was very tricky and risky to go in, especially if you're religious. If you got caught there doing anything, to spread your religion, you could be just disappeared and never seen again. So they had got this invitation. No, Hungary it was not. I think it was Hungary, not Poland. This gentleman who was running a yoga studio in Hungary, he had come to Sweden, and he had met the devotees in Sweden on the street. He was attracted to what they were doing, and so he extended an invitation for somebody to come and visit his yoga group in Hungary. So Alanath was going, but he was going to go by himself, and Harikesh turned up. So he said, "Oh, well, why don't you come with me? I'm leaving, in the morning for Hungary. Let's do some preaching." So he immediately said, "Okay, I won't go to America right now, I'll come with you." So he went straight to Hungary, and that started his very long involvement in developing the preaching in, the former Iron Curtain countries, the Soviet Union countries. So Harikesh ended up being in a situation, in Eastern Europe, people didn't speak English. So the same situation, that somehow or another, even if there's a fire, even if you can't speak the language, you've got to communicate. That's exactly what happened to him. They got to Hungary, they were doing these programs each evening at this yoga club, and after doing have the yoga exercises, and Harikesh would, start cooking, and then they would, he would play the mridanga, and Alanath would play the kartals, and then they'd have these kirtans. And he wrote later on telling Prabhupada that they were some of the best kirtans he'd ever experienced in his life, even outside of America or India. So even though they couldn't properly speak or explain things, after 2 or 3 days of chanting the Maha Mantra and eating prasada, these people started to understand there's something going on here. This is not just entertainment. Right? We're singing and dancing, and Harikesh was saying they were dancing like madmen. They would dance for like an hour at a time, and then they collapse, and then they have prasad, and then they get up and out from the kirtan. So it was very ecstatic and exuberant. But they didn't say anything because, you know, you're not allowed to preach in these countries. But these people, after 2 or 3 days of associating with these two devotees, they started to realize there's something more going on. This is not just some song. So eventually they got to the point, they stopped, they said, look, you have to tell us what this is all about. So, you know, they got purified. And by that little association, yeah, and even though they couldn't really, you know, speak directly to them, they had to speak through an interpreter. But then Harikesh started to gradually explain to them, you know, that the soul is different from the body. And then he said, whilst I was speaking, even though I was trying not to, he said a Sanskrit verse just popped out of my mouth. And as soon as I said that, they all jumped on me. What was that? What was that? So then in the end they had to tell them, you know, the basics of the philosophy. Then they all got a little afraid that if the authorities find out, they'll do something. But that was the beginning of his connection with preaching in Eastern Europe. So what Prabhupada had told him at the time when he took sannyas, which I thought was only relevant for Virahar Prakash because he was Spanish speaking and couldn't preach in India, it turned out to be perfectly relevant for Harikesh also, because he ended up staying there and not going to America. So Krishna has his way of, you know, arranging things. Okay, so another devotee. Well, there's other stuff I could say about Harikesh. I mean, for several months we were preaching around Eastern Europe. It was very tough. Sometimes, you know, there were places where they couldn't find anything to eat practically as well. And there was lots of meat products available and milk products, but nothing else. It was very difficult to get vegetables and grains and things. So at one point, when Harikesh had been preaching for some months in Eastern Europe, he came back to India and he made his report to Srila Prabhupada. And he mentioned there that he said it was very tough because, you know, the restrictions, and they had to kind of be always on the alert just in case they were, you know, captured by the government and things like this. He said that the worst thing is that we can't get anything to eat. So Prabhupada said, well, you can eat meat. And Harikesh, as he's talking, he kind of didn't want to take that in. So he let it go over his head and pretended that Prabhupada hadn't just said it. And then a minute later, Prabhupada said it again. He said, no, you can eat meat. If there's nothing else available, then you can eat meat. Then Harikesh said, but Prabhupada, what about my consciousness? Prabhupada said, damn your consciousness, you have to go and preach. So, that was... Prabhupada was very revolutionary. Anyway, so another devotee that was in not a similar situation, but he was in a situation where he couldn't get much association was Govinda Maharaj. Now he joined, I guess, at about 73 or 74. He was given sannyas very quickly. He was like a retired school teacher, I think, but always a Vaishnava, and very learned man. So he had been preaching in Hyderabad, then some land got donated to us in Bhubaneswar, and he was from Orissa, so from someplace not so far from there. So he was sent by Prabhupada to develop this land in Bhubaneswar. So the land itself was just a vast tract of what looked like desert. There was nothing growing on it, a few scrubby little brushes. There was no development. It was on the outskirts of Bhubaneswar. And it was just not very appealing. And so Govinda Maharaj had gone there, and it was very tough. He managed to get a little brick cottage built with a thatched roof. There was no running water, there was no electricity. And he had problems getting anybody there to help him, because he was a scholarly person, and he liked to translate Prabhupada's books. But to develop and build a temple there, as was desired, he needed help. But he couldn't get anybody. There was hardly anybody that wanted to stay there. It was very difficult. So on September the 6th of 1976, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan and he received a letter from Govinda Maharaj from Bhubaneswar. He was lamenting the lack of association and help for pushing on the preaching. He said, "I often feel myself dejected and desperate in doing Hari Kirtan because Kirtan is never done alone. It requires the company of devotees. I do not know how unfortunate I am that a sufficient number of suitable devotees are not coming here to help me with my Kirtan." He said he has 2 foreign devotees with him, but others just seem to come and go. They cannot adjust themselves to this solitary piece of land, where there are no modern amenities and city surroundings. They always dream of their previous centres, where there were all sorts of attractions, like a nice temple, nice deities, nice prasadam, nice company of devotees, nice rooms to put up in, etc. Whereas here, there is nothing, only a mud hut on a vast piece of solitary land. Apart from this, he said that the local people were all cheaters. They say very sweet words but do little, and they always try to cheat me. They are very much attached to their own business and sense gratification. They always try to get some material benefit from our association. And when they fail to derive it, then they desert. They are not very much serious. They are superfluous, and I have to work here through them. Kindly enlighten me on how to deal with them and make my preaching effective. So he was lamenting, I'm on my own, I've got no association. So in his reply, Prabhupada encouraged him to continue, and he even glorified his isolation as being part of our tradition. He said, preaching actually is done alone. Preaching is done alone. That is the experience that we get from the previous acharyas. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was travelling alone, and with great difficulty his associates induced him to accept one assistant. So, you get so much preaching, you hear so much about, the necessity of having association. It's the first real item after you've developed a little bit of faith. Adoshrada Tatu Sadhu Sangha. That's the next item. If you want to make an advancement, then you have to get association with devotees. But in the sannyas order, it's a little different. They are expected to not congregate with ordinary people or associate or get involved in social activities. Rather, a sannyasi has to go out and preach, even alone, so that they can experience that Krishna is looking after them in all circumstances and in all times and places. That's the business of the preacher. But he takes risks, and that forces him to depend on Krishna more and more. So with Govinda Maharaj there, the Prabhupada was glorifying the fact that he was alone and didn't have any association. And he's telling him this is actually the way that preaching is done. Okay, so 8:30, what time are we on to? 8:45, sorry. Okay, so a couple of other items. In August of 1976, Prabhupada went down to Hyderabad. Mahamsa Swami was down there. He just built a very nice temple, and that was due to be opened on Janmashtami. So that was done very successfully. And Prabhupada decided to stay on there for about a week afterwards, just to see how the devotees were coping with the new temple. They'd installed some new deities also. And if you've ever been to Hyderabad, they have the deities there are 6 feet tall. Radha and Mohan, they're 6 feet tall. Gondatai is 6 feet tall, and they have very big Jagannath deities as well. So it was quite a impressive place, but it needed a lot of care and attention. make sure that it was run properly. And Prabhupada decided to stay there for a week and encourage the devotees and just check on everything. So on the 24th of August, then, about a week after the opening, even in his quieter times, Prabhupada overflows with Krishna consciousness. In the evening, I went into Prabhupada's room and he was eating a pomegranate. So we had a system when Prabhupada had his lunch, then after 20 minutes or so he would go and take rest, and then after about an hour he would wake up, and then we would offer him a fresh flower garland, some sandalwood paste for his forehead, and we would give him some fresh fruit juice or fresh fruit. So this particular day Prabhupada had asked me to give him a pomegranate. You all know what a pomegranate is, right? Yeah. So after a while I went back in the room to clear away what he had not eaten, and the half-eaten fruit was sitting on his desk with the bright red seeds exposed. As I reached out to clear it away, he said, "Just see, all the universes are packed up just like this. The total is the material world." He was looking at the pomegranate. I asked, "Are they packed up so tightly?" So Prabhupada said, "Yes." He said, "The material scientists, what do they know of other universes? They cannot even estimate the number of planets in this universe." So in this way, Prabhupada relates everything to Krishna consciousness, and every statement that he makes is significant and educational. One of the great things about traveling with him is that you get to serve both his bodily aspect and his teachings, Vapu and Vanu. He is constantly preaching, and if no one is around, then he calls in his servants and preaches to them. He is so enthusiastic to speak about Krishna. So even when one's mind is distracted, one cannot help but be Krishna conscious in Prabhupada's presence, simply by his association. So that was, as we mentioned there with Govinda Maharaj, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was off on his own, Prabhupada went off on his own with no association. Now he was telling Govinda that you don't need association either. You just do your preaching work and Krishna will help you. So in ISKCON it was always preached that service in separation is more important than service in association. Especially with the movement spreading all over the world very rapidly, it just was not possible for Prabhupada to visit every place where we had temples. And so a lot of devotees rarely got to see him. But they got their energy and enthusiasm from this idea that service to the teachings, the Vani, is more important than service to the Vapu, or the body of the spiritual master. At the same time, Prabhupada said that doesn't mean that you neglect the body. As long as the spiritual master is here in corporeal form, he has to be served. But the more important service is to the teachings. So, at least when we were traveling with Prabhupada, we got the best of both worlds. Because we got to serve Prabhupada's transcendental body, and at the same time we got to hear him preaching at least 5 or 6 hours a day. On the morning walk, during the class, visitors would come, he would give darshans in the afternoon and evenings. So I figured that on average we would spend at least 5 or 6 hours every day just hearing Prabhupada speak about Krishna continuously. And he was so enthusiastic, just like this example of the pomegranate, just a piece of fruit, but that immediately, invoked some Krishna conscious dialogue, that this is just like the universe is all packed up together. What do the material scientists know? So that was the advantage of being with him. There were times when Prabhupada would, in Hawaii in 1976 in May, I think I mentioned this the other day, Prabhupada called me in at 9 o'clock at night to tell me that he was not going to take rest that evening, but he was working on his books. So there was one morning when he rang the bell about 1 o'clock in the morning, which was a little unusual. And I went into Prabhupada's room and pushed to Krishna and heard the bell. He was in another room, so he came in as well. And then Prabhupada told us, he said, "I'm not feeling very well, so I'm not going to go on the morning walk in the morning." So then after having locking us up and brought us in to tell us that. Then Prabhupada immediately started telling us about what he was translating in the Bhagavatam. So he was working, I think, on the end of the 7th canto. So since we were there, even though it was 1 o'clock in the morning, he couldn't resist, preaching to us. And so we sat there for an hour. And Prabhupada was just telling us, about what he was working on in the Bhagavatam. And about 2 o'clock, he said, all right, now you can go and take rest again. So that was the advantage of being with Prabhupada. It was impossible not to think of Krishna. Everything about his life was simply immersed in preaching Krishna consciousness. And so just by proximity, if you were with him, you automatically, there was no room for Maya. You had to be, at least have some modicum of Krishna consciousness just to stay with Prabhupada. So that was our advantage. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to stop here and we'll take some questions if anybody has any or comments. Yes, sir.
On the latter part of tonight's talk, you were speaking about how Prabhupada. In the latter part of tonight's talk, you were mentioning how Srila Prabhupada, highlighting different examples of where Srila Prabhupada advised certain devotees that just go and preach, that you don't need to associate. But on a previous day's talk, we mentioned that sometimes a devotee, they by their own volition say, I won't come because of some frustration. How do we reconcile that fact if I'm going to do a particular service and that I'm staying away under the pretense of preaching, as opposed to being frustrated and staying away on that part for that reason?
I'm not entirely clear what you're trying to say. Just keep it simple. And
how do we properly understand as practicing devotees that when we are doing a particular service that we may not be associating for a certain period of time, that we're doing it for the right reason, for preaching and pushing on the movement, as opposed to staying away from the association of devotees due to some other reason?
What's the difference in being away from the association of devotees when you're doing a particular service as compared to staying away from devotees because you don't want to do that?
How do we understand for our own self that what we are doing is in the right mood in terms of...
How do we understand that what we're doing is in the right mood? Well, Prabhupada gives the example of a man that's hungry. If you give him some food, you don't have to ask him, now are you satisfied? He doesn't have to be told, now you're satisfied. He feels it himself. So in the same way, if we're applying ourselves to the philosophy, the practices of Krishna consciousness in the proper way, that satisfaction will be there. That sense of being connected. If we're not practicing it in the proper way, sometimes then we feel there's a disconnect. Sometimes, you can be with a group of devotees and just not feel any part of it. That's due to the vagaries of our own mind and tricks of the modes of material nature. The fact is that when we're advancing in devotional service, we're always feeling the association of Krishna, the Guru, and the Vaishnavas. Prabhupada said when he went, although he appeared to be alone, he said, I always felt the presence of my spiritual master. He was with me and helping me always. So, to be a preacher, you have to have that kind of security of associating with Krishna and with the spiritual master, not necessarily on the physical plane, but within your heart. There's got to be that conviction and experience or realization. And then you'll always be enlightened. But if you're making, as you said, you use the word pretense, if you're keeping yourself aloof on the pretense that you're preaching, if anything is a pretense, it's not going to work. It's got to be genuinely felt and experienced. So you shouldn't artificially do anything. But even if you think that sometimes your association with devotees is artificial, do it anyway. I had an experience in 1974 when I was one of the Melbourne devotees at that time. And this was 2 years before I became Prabhupada's servant. So Prabhupada came for the Rath Yatra, and I was in charge of building the Rath cabs. So we had some site, some miles away from the temple. It was, open land that our landlord had, and he allowed us to build the Rath cabs there. So when Prabhupada arrived, it was a week before the Rath Yatra. We had huge amounts of work to do, and we couldn't even, get the time to leave the construction site so that we could go and see Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada was there for about 3 days before I finally could get away from the Rath site and go to the temple and, hear him give a class. So when I went in, we've been living a bit rough in a tent for like a month and a half. So our Saturday was not that good. I was in a bit of mine. I was feeling a bit depressed. Prabhupada's been here for 3 days. I haven't even seen him yet. And so I was kind of in not very good consciousness when I went to the temple this particular morning. And when I went in, all the book distributors were there. They were bouncing off the walls and the ceiling. They were ecstatic, bright-faced. And I was trying to get into the kirtan, but I was feeling very under the weather, as we say, under the modes. And I really just didn't feel part of the thing. But I did it, I was there, everybody else was ecstatic, so I was just trying to join in. But it was very half-hearted. And at one point, I remember, whilst the chanting was going on, I looked to the back of the room where Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasa, and it was one of those moments where our eyes connected. Prabhupada looked straight at me. It was just a flash, but I just felt like now I'm exposed. You can see what a cheater I am. I have no taste for chanting. I'm just making a show. I was thinking all these things. Prabhupada just, that one glance, that was it. He looked right in the eye, just 1 second. Anyway, so then when we stopped, then Prabhupada gave his class. And then during the class, then he made this particular point, and I knew he was speaking about me. But I'm sure there were many other devotees, in the room that were thinking that he was speaking about them too. Which often happened when Prabhupada made a point sometimes, you would think, that's just right, exactly what's happening to me. How did Prabhupada know that? Then he would speak to other devotees, and they had the same experience. Anyway, so he made this point. He said you should always chant Hare Krishna. He said even if you don't feel like chanting, even if you feel it's artificial, you should do it anyway because it will purify you. And I knew he was, I just felt that Prabhupada had seen that I had no enthusiasm, that I felt that it was artificial. And he was making this point, do it anyway because it will purify you. So, we had little experiences like that. The point being that sometimes due to our association with the modes of nature, we feel more enthusiastic or less enthusiastic, but we should just keep on associating together, keep on, doing our standard practices, even if we don't feel, even if we feel it's a pretend. It doesn't matter, do it anyway, because eventually it will be purifying, and you will feel or experience the spiritual nature of the activity. Right now we don't, because we identify with these bodies so much. We're not aware of the spiritual platform as an experience. When you get to a point where you're actually detached from the body and you experience spiritual life, then you're always ecstatic. That takes some time to get to that point. So I don't know whether that answered your question. Did it? All right. One more question. I may need an interpreter. No, I'm serious. I'm not. The accents I haven't quite picked up yet.
Krishna even after the pastor of ISKCON, will be Krishna empower that individual with spiritual strength and determination? Because our experience is Srila Prabhupada, it can be whole, everything. So, reaching out to Hindus, Christians who is in the society around the world, I've seen that. people, like right now the hymn from the
Keep this short. Keep it short and sweet.
Thank you. They bought.
What's your question?
It's not important you acting as an ambassador for Prabhupada.
Krishna is empowering.
The individual, when you go there and chant preach for Prabhupada, acting as an ambassador for Srila Prabhupada, wouldn't Krishna give you that strength and intelligence?
Can you?
I think what he's trying to get is asking if one is going out to preach that as an ambassador for Krishna. Will Krishna give such a person the empowerment and the protection to carry out that service?
Would Krishna protect a person who goes as his ambassador to preach? Absolutely. He says that in Bhagavad Gita, that there'll never be one more dear to me than those who are spreading this message of this Bhagavad Gita, the science of love of God. So yeah, that's the way Prabhupada said, that's the fast track to spiritual advancement if you go out and preach. If you're not preaching, then, it's slow but sure. But by preaching, very rapidly you can get Krishna's attention. Don't try to see Krishna, but act in such a way that Krishna can see you. Or we want to see you. Because he's seeing everything. But Krishna takes particular notice of those devotees who make an effort to preach on his behalf. So yeah, you get some special mercy from there, for sure. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to know if dreams, Prabhupada once said, I read somewhere, Prabhupada said that dreams are more or less like illusions. What happens when you dream Krishna and you dream Srila Prabhupada?
Okay, so we've heard that dreams are just like figments of the mind.
Yeah.
But what happens if we dream about Prabhupada or we dream about Krishna?
Yeah,
So Prabhupada did mention, actually he told me once about a dream that he had. I was giving him this massage in Vrindavan. And he said, last night I had a dream that the temple courtyard became flooded with water. And I was thinking, oh, one more inch and then the whole thing will be spoiled. So that was his dream. So I said, well, I was trying to figure out, is that something significant? Is it, like a prediction? No. I don't know, whatever. So I asked Prabhupada, so, how do we see that? I don't understand it. And Prabhupada said, it's just the mind, that's all. So just like if one place you heard about a golden mountain, that example is given in the Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
A mountain and gold, and then the mind puts the two elements together. But it's a figment. So he said, just like I was giving him this massage, so he took the bottle of oil, he said, now, here's the bed, here's the bottle of oil. Now, if I take the bottle of oil and put it under the pillow, does it make any sense? He said, so that's dreaming. It doesn't make any sense, it's just bits and pieces floating around. But he said that if you do dream about Krishna or your spiritual master, that is not ordinary. That means that they're appearing in your dreams. Because you can't capture Krishna by your own mind. If Krishna doesn't want to appear within your mind, he won't do it, you won't see him. So if he does appear within your mind, or if the spiritual master appears, then that's significant. At the same time, we don't put dreams above the instructions that we receive, for our sadhana and practice. I just dreamed that Prabhupada said I don't have to chant my rounds anymore. Then we know, okay, this is a bogus dream. Because Prabhupada would never say that. So whatever we might dream, it might be nice. But the real thing is the instructions of the spiritual master, Guru Vakya. Whatever the spiritual master speaks, that you do. If somebody said, I had a dream. So, okay, that's very nice. You had a dream, but go on chanting, do your business, do your service. Yeah? Alright, so I think it's getting late now, 5 to 9, we'll finish at this point. So the last session we'll have tomorrow evening, same time, same place. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.